Welcome back everyone. This video we're going to look at another way of optimizing our operations. So this is the second video in that series and we're looking at materials management. So essentially materials or stock or inventory, those three words are pretty much interchangeable. We're going to look at strategies involved in planning, organizing and controlling the inputs used in the operating process. So in the operations process, I suppose. So these are the three main things when we're looking at materials or stock that the operations manager needs to take into consideration. They need to ensure that the right materials, so that the actual correct materials are available in the right quantity for the right cost when they're actually required. And we're going to look at ways to manage that. But essentially you need, all the actual correct materials so that production can continue. You need the right quantity. One, you don't want not enough, because then production will have to stop and you'll have to tell your customers that you're out of stock. But you also don't want too much, because stock that's actually or materials that are there that can't be used, they either take up space and then they're not being turned into outputs which can't be sold. So it costs the organisation money in either idle revenue, what we call idle revenue, or it actually costs to set up a warehouse to store that actual those inputs, which can be costly. And obviously we need it at the right cost. So we've got to look at, as an operations manager, you need to look at the correct cost for optimal quality, and that's something you need to take into consideration. So materials management planning. So we looked at facilities location, and those kind of things would be more strategic type planning. This type of planning is more tactical type planning, so your medium term planning. So we have a production plan, and that is a plan which outlines the activities undertaken in the operations process. So it's just an overall plan of what the organisation is looking to produce, whether that be a good or a service, and how they're actually going to go about producing that, and what the actual best way is. So that's an overall sort of broad plan of what they're going to produce. Then we become a little more specific, and then they can write up a master production schedule. And it's a pretty important document, and it shows what the business plans to produce, how they plan to produce it within a given time period. So again, this is really part of tactical planning, and the actual labour requirements that are needed to produce that. So how many people are actually required to produce what they're going to produce. And then it's broken down even further into the actual materials that are required to fulfill that master production schedule. So the materials requirements plan is a computerized method of materials planning that ensures exact materials and parts are available when needed. And that's really important, that they are available when they're needed, otherwise production will have to stop, and you've got workers there either doing nothing, and you're not actually producing anything, so you can't make any money. So that's how you can actually plan your materials. Now we're going to look at ways in which we can control our materials. So we look at our inventory control or our stock control. So once they've been planned, all our materials have been planned and they've been purchased and delivered, they come into the organisation, and the operations manager needs to make sure they can keep account of them. So that's where inventory control comes in. And it should, if it's done well, should minimise the costs by reducing overstocking and reduce waste, and improves efficiency, and should reduce costs overall. So some ways that they can do that: the organisations need to undertake stock takes. Sometimes they do that daily, sometimes they'll do that every quarter, so every 3 months. And that's a physical count of the actual stock they have. And that enables them to identify any stock control problems, because what they'll have a computerized, they normally have a computerized number of what stock is on hand, and then they do a physical count, and then they compare to see if there's any discrepancies, and then that's where lost stock can come into it. and they can account for whether stock's been stolen or it's simply been lost. Now, a way of controlling that is through barcoding. Barcoding is one of the great inventions in operations. It enables organisations to really keep a strong hold of an account of their actual materials. Some other ways, some other strategies that can be used are what we call a just-in-time process. Now, that ensures the exact amount of material inputs will arrive only as they are needed. So there's no stock, stored. So there's no big warehouses of stock. They only arrive as they are needed. So that ensures that there's never large amounts of stock on hand. Now, in order to do this, you need really good relationships with your suppliers, because if the stock doesn't arrive on time, then your production has to stop. So you need a really good supply chain management, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So let's take an example. Dell does this really well. Dell computers for just-in-time. So they've got their main factory. That's where they produce their computers. They get an internal order. So their actually orders come online, and then they check the stock that they have. So that goes to their factory. They need to see what they have on hand, and their trucks actually arrive with supplies every 2 hours. So that ensures that there's no stock actually kept on hand, that it basically comes off the truck and goes straight into production. So that's a really, every 2 hours, this is a large company that has embraced a just-in-time process, and it ensures that they don't waste any part of their factory on storing stock. It comes off the truck and goes straight into production. Another strategy is barcoding. So that helps, and we spoke about that before, it helps minimize loss. You can track theft of stock, and it provides real-time information on your stock. So if you have a customer and says, we want to order this amount, then you can pretty much, because it's barcoded, it should be in a computer system, you can check to see whether you can fulfill that order. And if not, you either have to order from your suppliers or you have to notify them what you can produce. So again, with barcoding is used with Dell. So that same process, once it comes off the truck, it's all scanned in. So then they know as soon as they're becoming, their stock is becoming a little bit low, bang, or more orders, because they know how many orders are actually being received from their customers, and then a new order of supplies is then actually made and delivered. So in order to do all this, you need really good supply management. So our supply chain is essentially the range of suppliers from which the organisation purchases materials, but also then how it gets to customers. So supply chain management is critical, because if the materials are not on hand, nothing can be produced, and that costs the organisation money. If the materials are of poor quality, it's difficult to produce quality products. We looked at that when we looked at the operations system. And if the correct quantity of materials is not available, again, production can't meet demand. Now, if you can't meet the demand for your customers, then the chances are that they'll look elsewhere. So it's really important that you have good supply chain management, that you have really strong relationships with your suppliers, so that your production can just continue without any problems whatsoever, especially when it comes to materials. The last thing you need is that everything's up and running, you just haven't got the materials to produce the products or service that you actually require. So having a good supply chain management and strong relationships with your suppliers is critically important. So just to recap, operations managers need to ensure that the right inputs in the right quantities at the right time. So they're the three main areas that an operations manager, when it comes to materials, need to focus on. Materials planning, we had a production plan, master production schedule, and materials requirement plan. And then how do we actually control that stock or that inventory? We can do stock takes. We have a just-in-time process, which is a really good system to use. And barcoding helps essentially with stock takes and the just-in-time system. And again, last thing was the supply chain management. It's really important to have strong supplier relationships, that can deliver your materials to you and also deliver your finished goods to your customers. For videos, activities, questions and more, always go to teachingbubble.com.